Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends beyond the band, it's time for the podcaster who buys cough drops in bulk because of the psychosomatic properties. He thinks it takes away his mouth noises, but it really does, brain. It's time for Sleep With Me, the podcast that puts you to sleep. And thank you, everybody that's sharing from within your podcasting app. That's great. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody that's supporting the show on Patreon. If you want to join all the people that are holding the show up on their shoulders, go to sleepwithmepodcast.com/patron. You know, if you get value out of the show, just compare it to what you use regularly every month and say, geez, maybe I should give some of that value to the podcast that puts me to sleep 10 nights a month or 20 nights a month, 30 nights a month. Because just because the podcast it comes out for free, there's a lot of hard work and things that go into it. And I'd love your support. Sleepwithmepodcast.com/patron, Patron. And this Sunday, October 9th or something, I think it's October 9th is this Sunday. No, isn't it? Is it October or September? I'm not joking either. October 9th, I believe, Co was telling me. At noon Pacific time, we're going to do our first Patreon hangout for all our patrons. So if you want to sign up and join that, I got a little fun little idea for all the patrons. Sleepwithmepodcast.com/patron. Details to follow. Also, Mystery Bard went viral this week. If you say, geez, I want someone that's written a viral hit to write my theme song, or write a song for my grandmother, or write a song for our corporate retreat, hire the Mystery Bard. He's over at jonathanmann.net. And nothing can be more expressive, more unique, and more original than a song written by Jonathan Mann. Mystery Bard, what do you say about commissioning songs?
I've written commissioned songs for about 40 of you. Birthdays and weddings and just because, for big and little occasions too. You tell me your story and I write the song that brings a smile to your face. A gift that can't be lost or stolen, can never be replaced. About 40 of you wanna hear from the rest. I wanna write songs for all of you, so get in touch and let your heart right out of its chest.
So that's it. Go over to jonathanmann.net and, hire the Mystery Bard to write a song for you. Also, I'm trying to get back to recommending podcasts. Save It for the Show is a show made by Eddie and Dan. It's like a high R-rated show, but if you like kind of not safe for work humor, with a little raunch, launch the raunch. It's a funny show, and I think the highlight of the show is Eddie and Dan's interaction and their friendship. For me, also Dan sounds like one of my best friends from growing up. So check out Save It for the Show on iTunes or wherever you consume your podcasts. Housekeeping, we're on the web, www.sleepwithmepodcast.com. Older episodes are there. You can comment on our show notes. You can email me feedback at sleepwithmepodcast.com. On Twitter at Dear Scooter, or over on Facebook. That's where we kind of been doing some live streams at Sleep With Me Podcast. I want to thank Chris Posterson from Sounds Like an Earful Studios, who does our theme music and edited this episode. Scotty and Jennifer on our artwork. As we said at the top, Jonathan Mann does our lullabies over at jonathanmann.net. And we have a Facebook group, sleepwithmepodcast.com/nods, NODS. I want to thank Lauren, Lida, Summer, and Sarah, and Julie and Jennifer, who moderate over there. Take the free time to foster a community of fellow listeners. So thank you so much, and let's get on with the show. All right, hey, you up all night tossing, turning, mind racing, trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep? Well, welcome. This is Sleep With Me, the podcast that's here to put you to sleep. We do it a bedtime story. All you need to do is get in bed, turn out the lights and press play. I'm going to do the rest. And what I'm going to do is create a safe place where you can set aside whatever it is that's keeping you awake, whether it's thinking or feeling or sensing or, noise, whatever it is. The safe place is a place where you can either lay that stuff down before you enter in, or ideally I'll distract you from that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send my voice across the deep dark night. I'm going to try to use lulling, soothing tones, pointless meanders, slow going. I don't know if I've ever used that before, but tonight I may use that. Slow going. It'll be slow going here. Sleep with me. Essence of molasses. I've never used that, but tonight I might use essence of molasses. The spirit of molasses. I think that was a ship that ship didn't sink. It just took forever. Da-doom. A little molasses joke there. Took forever to get there. But what I'm going to use all those techniques for is to take your mind off of stuff, distract you, so that either I can escort you across the threshold from wake to sleep, or I can distract you as you float across, ideally waking into the waiting arms of Morpheus, or just a pillow, giant, which I think Morpheus is covered in pillows in this particular Morpheus, not the other famous Morpheuses. This is the Morpheus for just the pillow, Morpheus, the pillow god, the god of pillows. That's the main. It's gender neutral Morpheus, just so everybody knows, but also hypoallergenic. This is what I said. Can you send me some talking points for Morpheus? Because I said, can you have your people get in touch with my people? And they said, this is a bank. And I said, right. I said, I need to get a hold. I said, I thought this was, and they said, no, this is Michigan. I said, oh, I'm trying to reach Morpheus, not Michigan. And I said, whoopsie. I said, do you have a number for Morpheus? And they said, from the movie? No. I said, no. I said, movie. No. I'm trying to reach the god of sleep. I think it's the god of sleep. I didn't do my research clearly because I'm calling you. I said, do you have is your bank sleep friendly? And they said, it's actually no one comes to the bank barely, so it's pretty dull here. And I said, man, I could I speak to your manager? Could I do an on location episode there? And they said, no. They said, no, you're not allowed here. And I said, well, okay. Anyway, back to my problems. Do you have a number for Morpheus? Not the Morpheus from the movies, the real Morpheus, the god of pillows, the god of snuggling in. With another, it could be with another person, but when you get your face in there, you bury it in and you go, you with your cheek, stuff that cats do. That's what Morpheus is the god of, Morpheus is not the god and goddess. I wish there was a word that covered god and goddess. Doesn't that bother you? Oh, you've got to get back. You have a customer. I thought you said it wasn't busy. Don't most people just take pictures of their checks? Well, anyway, do believe it or not, I'm sorry to call your bank. Believe it or not, I'm recording the opening of a podcast. So, I've got customers too, a lot of them, and they're wondering what I'm talking about. Could you put me on the phone with your customer first? I think that would be pretty good material. Well, hello, ma'am. Yes, I'm here. Did you get a toaster when you opened your account at the bank? You did. That's good. I was wondering, are you familiar with Morpheus? What am I saying? Morpheus. Are you familiar with Morpheus? Yes, the god of sleep. Oh, are you a big fan of Bullfinch? Because one day I plan on reading Bullfinch. You are. You used to teach mythology. Excellent. I guess I've reached the right person. Do you have a contact number for Morpheus? I believe it or not, I don't have a way to get in touch with Morpheus, and that's what I do. This is, ma'am, you're gonna laugh yourself to sleep tonight, but My job is to escort people into the arms of Morpheus, and I don't even have a way to reach Morpheus. Isn't that wild? Wait, I'm sorry, what? If Morpheus wants to talk to me, they will get a hold of me. Well, I'm glad you used a proper pronoun, at least, ma'am. Clearly, you're familiar with as Morpheus as I am. Oh, you have a PhD in bullfinch? Well, that's no bull, ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so. Oh, boy. If you do hear from Morpheus, if you could just say, Morpheus, hey, reach out to no smoting either. Please, I prefer not to be smoted, especially by a pillow god. Or, you know, could we do like a pillow being? I don't want to be smoted, you know, because I would rather always have positive memories of pillows, you know, and not be in some afterlife where I'm like, oh, he's the one covered in pillows. That's Scooter, crossed Morpheus. Okay, thanks, ma'am. I'll let you get back. Are you making a deposit or withdrawal? You know, it's none of my business. Of course it's not. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks. No, you don't have to put me on with the teller. Because I'm in the middle of a podcast intro. It's the craziest thing, I know. Could you put me on, could you just ask the teller, like I'm having a problem with my toaster oven and I don't want another, okay, no, bye. Sorry, folks, I'm back. If you're new to the podcast, oh boy, that is what happens here. So that's the old take. Here's a little proposal. Were you thinking about all the stuff that normally keeps you awake while I was talking, while I had that little bank transaction? Well, that's good. Wait, is this, I'm still on the phone with the bank teller. Did I put you to sleep? Oh boy. Oh, you lost your job. Okay, well, I thought I had broken away from your call. The call is coming from within my brain. Oh boy. Okay, I better get back to my audience then. Excuse me, sorry about that. That was my brain. Nothing to worry about. Just my, you know. So if you're new here, the podcast is a little bit different, a little bit goofy, but made to take your mind off of stuff so that you can fall asleep. So clearly, you don't need to take me seriously. You're under no pressure to fall asleep, but if you do, you know, you can stop listening whenever you feel like it. I'll be here the whole time. Tonight I'll be here like over an hour. So if you're having trouble sleeping or you just can't sleep and you want a companion in the deep dark night, that's what I'm here for, to tell you a bedtime story. So I'm going to use lulling, soothing. As you've seen, I'm going to use to get distracted. I'm going to indulge in those distractions. Talking to bank tellers, that's a great way to put people to sleep. Talking to bank customers. You know, just curious, you know, I'll be curious about the misfires of my brain. But with the whole purpose, whatever, you know, you may be a polytheist, you know, you may be into polytheism when it comes to your pillow god and goddesses, or you may just have one. Whatever it is, I'd love to help you fall asleep because I've been there and I know what it's like not to be able to fall asleep. So that's it. Trying to think of what else clearly there's not much to cover here. You don't need to take me seriously. And I'm glad you're here. I realize it might have taken some skepticism to overcome and say, well, let me check this podcast out. Let me give this a shot. And I appreciate that. And I hope I can earn your trust. This podcast doesn't work for everybody. You know, I hope it works for you because I'm glad you're here. And I really hope and I really yearn to help you fall asleep. So thank you so much for stopping by. Before we get to the story part, when you put your hand on the refrigerator tomorrow, you say, what did Scooter need me to remember? Well, you know, I'd like you to support the show. If you get some value out of it, think about supporting the show at Patreon, sleepwithmepodcast.com/patron. Thanks so much, and let's get on with the show. Hey, everybody, it's a trending Tuesday here, and I don't think we could officially call this Broadway week on Sleep With Me podcast, but it kind of, I guess I've got Broadway on the mind. Or I'm in a New York, specifically Broadway, nostalgia state of mind. And there's probably going to be another episode related to this, but the main reason, or where it started, was I started thinking a lot about the song Nothing from a chorus line due to an interaction on Twitter where, you don't know, Maggie and we were talking about feelings, and that song gives me the chills in a good way. And then I was thinking about dissecting that episode. So then I was like, okay. And then I listened to Nothing, the 2006 edition, Natalie Cortez, about 9,000 times maybe. And you say, well, it's not possible. I said, well, I stopped. I called the super person. I said, stop spinning the earth, man. I got some listening to do. So I was in a Broadway state of mind. And, when you do that, so then I started thinking of other Broadway stuff. And, then when you're an overthinker and an over daydreamer, you start to daydream and you start to think about regrets. And when I go down that road, it becomes what this episode will be a My Life with the Perm episode. So this is going to take also multiple layers of setting up. If you're new, we don't do these My Life with the Perm episodes very much. So I'll set that up. Then I'll set up my relationship with the Broadway. I think they call it the Great White Way. And then I say, oh boy, that's, it doesn't exactly encourage diversity. So somebody can get who do we need to get on the phone? Ethel Merman or somebody? I don't even know what Ethel. I mean, I don't think is Ethel Merman related to. Is she the ambassador of Broadway? I guess somewhere in my mind it is. I think I just look for reasons to say Ethel Merman. That's a nice. But so My Life with the Perm, I'll try to do as quick as I can, but I don't have human hair on my head. And I can hear people, knee-jerking or their partners. Wait, did he just say he doesn't have hair on his head, so he's bald? No, I have hair. I have hair. I don't have human hair on my head. I have something, which the easiest way to refer to it is I have fur. Something much more similar to animal fur than human hair on my head. Yes, and I was born that way. And once you start to notice fur, and you go out in the world, you'll see other people, out there on the hair margins of society. I've never seen Eddie Snowden up close, but I believe he also has fur. John Ronson, I don't know I think he has hair, but he has a fur-like hair. There's a couple other people that recently I talked about. They said they might have fur. But what that means, they say, okay, you're blowing my mind. And I said, well, just try having your mind encased in fur instead of hair. It doesn't do well for the, it doesn't damage your self-esteem. It just, it shortens it. They say, okay, most people's self-esteem is in a 0 to 100 level. You have fur, so you're going to be graded on a curve. What would I say fur? Well, that's what my dad told me. He said, you have fur, but it's extremely straight, no natural part at all. My hair just grows out in all directions from its follicle, extremely thin, very, very thin. And you'd say, is it thinning? And I'd say, I don't know, because I say I've always had this, possibly, but I'm not sure. You'd say it's fine. My hair has no body, it's bodiless. And it can't be styled. It doesn't I found one particular hair product that will somewhat control my hair. But I've given up on style within the quotes, for my hair. It's just not a thing that's going to happen. So it's best to just keep a buzz going. Probably why I kept a buzz going for 26 years. Yeah. But just get my hair buzzed, but also I hate haircuts. I mean, who could be surprised about that? It involves people touching me. I don't like that. And, it always ended in disaster. But I had this one fateful meeting, and I think about how the universe can bend or there's alternate realities. And I know there's one alternate reality that started long ago when I was just in middle school. And what I believe was someone at the time that was incredibly confused at their brilliance, which was, and I'll say their name because I guess they're kind of a public figure, Frank Zizzo, a barber in Syracuse, New York, that me and my friends went to. And Frank, at the time, I don't know if his hair was naturally curly or he had a perm. I saw a recent picture of him and I said, I think he had a perm at the time. But he used to cut my hair and he felt bad for me because it wasn't, his job was just to cut it. It wasn't, he's a barber, not a styler. But even then he knew that once hair started growing on other parts of my body, I was going to be in for it because they say with hair like this on your head, it's going to, it's going to cut down on your chances of finding a mate. Let's just put it that easy. And so Frank said to me one time, he said, why don't you grow your hair out and we'll give you a perm and then it won't be, he goes, I can't believe how straight this is. He give you a nice little curl. I mean, he said it like a nice little curl or something like that. But, let's see. So, but I said, no. I have enough problems. The last thing I need is a perm and I know it'll be super tight and it'll probably turn green because my friends will throw me in a pool. So, I said, no, that was the call of adventure. And I said, no, that's not the adventure I'm looking for. I'd rather just lie. Like, I'll just have to deal with this. Plus, the whole idea is totally ridiculous. You're going to give me a freaking perm. Like, nowadays you do that, you get on the news, it would become a thing. But Frank was just trying to help me in his own way because he had a perm. I'm sure he was like flying high. He had the barbershop at the mall. You could go get the best pizza in Syracuse was at this mall. I think at the time it was Fairmount Fair Mall, maybe Camillus Mall. It doesn't really matter because that's where Pavone's Pizza was. The only place you could get New York style pizza by the slice in Syracuse that I was aware of. And, this was let's see, was this the 80s or the 90s? On the cusp, I think. So where better to work than a mall? It was like being in a John Hughes movie. Except he was too old, it would have been creepy, but he could have been, an extra. Let's see. So, but I always think about, geez, what would have happened? How would my life be different if I said, yes, let's get a perm? And at some point in some other universe, little Andy, it did get a perm, and his life was much different than mine. And so every once in a while, one of these episodes, I like to revisit what Andy's life is like, the Andy with the perm, hence my life with the perm. So that's setup number one. Now, setup number two is I went to university, school, college in New York City, in the Bronx, the Boogie Down. A borough of the city so nice they named it twice. New York, one hell of a town. And it was, and it's a place I loved. And once a year, my parents would come visit me, and I believe it was in January. And every year we would go to a Broadway show. And even then, I was a bit like I am now. Like I tended to stay to the Bronx, and I didn't, get into Manhattan as much as I probably should have to enjoy. You did get to go to some student shows where you'd get really cheap tickets to Broadway shows. But I guess, like you say, geez, Andy with the perm probably went to a Broadway show every week because this was like the Blue Man Group. This was when they were off Broadway, when I was living in New York. The Wetlands, the CBGBs, all these places. This was the heyday. And meanwhile, I was just like pulling tubes in my room, lying low. But that's not the important part. The important part is that, so every year we would go to a Broadway show. In one year, and I think this was again at the height of the fame of the Les Miserables, we went to see Les Mis. And Les Mis was this huge, I don't think, and I guess this was, I don't think Les Mis was as big as Hamilton. Because I think the only thing that was even close to as big as Hamilton was the Book of Mormon, maybe. And I don't know, I'm not a Broadway expert. But it was pretty big. It was pretty big, Les Mis. And, Jean Valjean and The Prisoner 1, 2, 3, 4, 89. And the rest of the characters, Susan, the Prime Minister, Pete Nice, I think he was in it. And I don't know if Horatio Hornblower, but there was, the Coquette, or I don't even know, Colette. I guess I haven't listened to it. in a while, but it was a beautiful, beautiful musical. And we just happened, not only did we get to go to Les Mis, but one of my dad's friends, and I barely ever had any celebrity interactions in my whole life. So this was a big time one. One of my dad's friends was dating the innkeeper's wife, and she was the show stealer. Like her number was the one that was like the one everybody, when you left the show, she was like, she wasn't the star. She stole the show in the best way possible. When you go to a Broadway show, you say, oh, you know, well, she really stole the show. It was awesome. And then the innkeeper's wife came, and I hope that's what it was, the innkeeper's wife. But my dad's friend happened to be dating her. And I mean, she, like, literally, people fell out of their seats. Her performance is that good. So he had arranged, he was not with us, but he had arranged that we would meet her after the show and get a tour behind the scenes of the Les Mis. I mean, can you imagine going to meet Lynn, like, back in, you know, Lynn's, like, in Hamilton, like, and I've not seen Hamilton, but, you know, one day I will, like 27, 20, 28. But anyway, it's not important, because I don't live in New York and Lynn's gone. So, I'm sure, like I'd love to see it, anybody, but let's see. So we were going to get to go backstage. That was my point. Another cockamamie theory I have. Now, this is just a theory based on, so I was like 20 years old, maybe 19 years old when I saw Les Mis. But I'm pretty sure, and this is 100% circumstantial, so not sure at all, that the innkeeper's wife at the time is a woman that wrote the music for Frozen. But that's not based on, zero facts about that. That's just a guess. And I don't even know. I think I tried to check on the internet one time, and I couldn't confirm. I used the internet, but I couldn't confirm or deny it. So if that is the case, you know, I'm extremely proud of this actress, and you could see it then that she was just super brilliant. But so we went outside the stage door, just like, you know, adoring fans do. And I don't know if there was anybody else waiting to meet, but it was like, who are you? We're meeting the innkeeper's wife, you know, so people were falling, you know, they said, you got to be kidding me. And she brought us backstage, and we got a tour of, you know, the backstage. And if you've been backstage at Broadway, I guess the movie Birdman kind of shows what it's like a little bit. It's not glamorous, but it's so cool. Actually, Game of Thrones did a pretty accurate job, too, of just being like, you know, it's a workplace. Behind the stage, it's a workplace. And, you know, New York real estate is expensive. So most of the real estate is sped in the front of the house, you know. Everything else, you know, you got to be adaptable. But, I mean, to talk about a gracious act, here's someone that in Broadway terms, I mean, she was the belle of Broadway. And she took the time to show me and my parents, and I think maybe a couple other people around. And then she said to me, she took me aside and she said, would you like to meet Coquette or Colette? I don't know. The actress, and I'd fallen in love with her, I think, during like both the innkeeper's wife and Colette. I don't know. Because I said, well, I'm trying to remember if the actress was an adult. I can't picture the ages, you know. Okay, so I just looked it up. So it's Cosette, not Colette or whatever. I think I was in love with a Colette once in my life, too. Pretty sure. I'd like to know when that was. Maybe twice. But so Cosette, and I think there was a 20-something version of Cosette. That was who she was like, do you want to meet Cosette? You know, you're the same age, and she was like, I don't think she was trying to fix me up because I didn't, you know, but I always think, you know, what if I had become friends with Cosette or, you know, the actress playing Cosette and this woman? But, you know, I was very quiet and shut down and nervous. So I guess I thought, like, if we just, you know, take a moment here, and I thought it would invoke the spirit of Carole King, you know, now that she has a Broadway musical based on her life, to help me with music. So as, I check and communicate with Carole King across the transverses, we're staying outside, probably the New Amsterdam Theater. I don't know if that's actually where I was playing, but let's just say, because that sounds like a nice theater. And we feel the music that Carole King is broadcasting across, the different realities of the universe. It's a Piano Sonata 13, from Mozart. And as it's playing, it's coming out of the stage door. And as it opens up, we see the actress who's played the innkeeper's wife there. My dad grins and he says, I think we're here for my friend. I think his name, I don't know. And he said, she says, well, come on in. And then she meets my mom, and my dad's grinning from ear to ear, excited, ready to, he's cracking jokes. And my mom is grinning, a little bit like me, out of both anticipation and awkwardness. And then I stand just on the edge of the shadows, half bathed in the lights of the marquee, and half in the darkness of the backstage of Broadway. And then she says, look, who is this? And I step into the lights, curly locks flowing off my head, as this is my life with the perm. And I say, oh, Mozart, that sounds great. I'm Andrew. Nice to meet you. Your performance was beyond mesmerizing. It was enthralling. And I know this must happen to you all the time. Since my dad's friend is dating you, I fell in love with you at the time. And I still can feel your performance within me. And she says, well, thank you. And I said, I'm sure the hours and hours and hours of time you've spent, I hope you get to enjoy it. And she says, well, I'm exhausted, but, thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming. And I say, you are so gracious. We really appreciate you giving us this time. And she says, well, don't you want to see she says, why don't we go on the stage? And I said, well, I used to tap dance. Would I be able to tap dance on the Les Mis stage? And then she says, well, only if you can shuffle ball step and shuffle off to Buffalo. And I say, that's about all I can heel toe as well. And so we have a chuckle, a laugh, if you will. And, this is the late 80s, early 90s. Oh, no, it's mid 90s, actually. I guess just I am mixed up with time. And Tommy's on Broadway. And I say, feel like I can see me, hear me, feel me, leaking through the walls. And she says, you can, actually. That is from Tommy. And I say, this is going to sound like lunacy because I just saw Tommy and it was great, but not the same as this, your show. Your show's life-changing. I don't sing and I barely dance. And we're doing a shuffleball step discussion. And she's watching me and then adjusting me. And I say, is the master of the house in? And she has a laugh, and I say, "Is that from?" She said, "I said, when I watched Tommy, I was picturing, I was imagining that Mike Myers was Tommy." And she laughed hysterically because she said, "Holy cow, I just saw it." And she goes, "I'm friends with that actor, but in that wig, he does look like Mike Myers in that wig." And he said, well, thank goodness I'm not the only one. But during this performance of Les Mis, my attention was so overwhelmed. I was there. And she says, well, thanks. She goes, you're a regular. And then I did a heel toe to do, like where I put my hand out. And then I pretended then I did the one where I crossed my knees and put my elbow on my knee, and then my fist on my chin, like I was my hand on my hip. And she laughed at that. And I said, I said, thank you so much. And she said, well, let's go on the rest of the tour. And I said, she was like, I'd love to see the barrier. I said, how do they do that? And she said, that's the magic of Broadway, son. And I said, well, thank you for protecting me from. And she said, you seem a little nervous, though. She goes, could you mind me asking about your hair? She goes, she goes, there's just something about it. She goes, it's like it's your hair. She goes, can I? And she said, and my parents were kind of talking, and they were analyzing one of the tables. And my dad wanted to lift it up to see if it was made from balsa wood. And she said, go ahead. And she goes, go ahead and lift that table up, sir. And then she said, over here. She goes, feels like your hair is singing to me. And I said, there's a curly-haired woman named Carole King. And I said, this is going to sound crazy, but she broadcasts through my hair. And she said, I could see. She goes, I believe. She goes, I'm not here. She goes, and I said, well, it's not. I said, it's not perceptible to, it comes across in music, but, music that stirs your soul. Not like the music of the night, but a bit, not that different either. And she goes, I never see. She goes, is that a perm? And I said, listen to this. It's a permanent perm. And she said, what is, she goes, and I said, this, I go, this man, Frank Zizza, he called me one time because and I made a choice. Went to his barber shop, the one full blue moon of the year. After dark, of course, that's when the moon, the moon's blue. And I went into his shop. It was closed, but Frank was there. As soon as I closed the door, clouds covered the moon. Lightning started, and, Frank was wearing a lab coat, which is, and I said, oh, no, is that a barber coat or a lab coat? He said, both. And I said, and then Frank put on he put on some Roy Orbison Candyman, which, to be honest, creeped me out for a minute. But I said, I'm just here to get my hair permed. And he said, permanently permed. And he goes, I've been waiting to meet you. And I said, sorry, I know you're trying to give us a tour of this Broadway show. I'll be get through this backstory as quick as I can. But, you asked about my hair, and I wanted to tell. And she goes, I'm enthralled. So he put on Candyman by Roy Orbison, and I said, I want to see where, and he said, don't worry, because I'm here to help you. This permanent perm is going to change everything. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, in another universe, you're gathering circumstantial evidence that a woman who appeared in the play, the musical Les Mis, is going to be the same person that writes the transcendent music of the Anna and Elsa thing, Frozen. And I said, I don't know what you're talking. I said, is that anything like The Little Mermaid? He said, like that, but better. And he goes, one day you'll know what Idina Menzel means. And at the time, I didn't know what it meant. I still don't, just because it's only 1998 or 90-something. But then he put me in a chair and, science and mysticism and Barbary and smell, the stupid smelly stuff that makes hair curlers. They all came together. I can't talk much more about that night, but, it wasn't just my hair that got curled. It was, my toes were curled, but not in a, toe curling way. But it also curled the DNA within my follicles. So my hair is, sperm is permanent. So it is my hair. And I can do this thing. I call it curl bounce. See that when I raise it. And she said, it's hypnotic. And I didn't tell her about I said, but, I just wanted to let you know I believe in you. So whatever your dream is, in those moments, don't give up on it. Whether it's here on Broadway or somewhere else, or you have some dream that has nothing to do with this, keep at it. Come at it from different angles. change it around. And then she said, "Are you nervous about meeting Cosette, the actress that plays Cosette, or something else?" And I said, "I'm going to meet the actress that plays Cosette." There was a silence in the room. And he said, "I thought I was just here to encourage you to follow your dreams." And I said, "Yeah, I do have a crush on Cassette from the musical, but usually I don't meet I said, this could be breaking, the rules." And she said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't." She goes, "Yeah, I was just watching your curls, she goes, "It's like watching something under the sea, like seagrass or kelp or something waving." She goes, she goes, "Do you want to meet Cassette or not?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm here." I said, "Is everything okay with the actress that plays Cassette?" And she goes, "I think you're here like a bridge over troubled waters." And I said, "Is there trouble here in the backstage of, And I noticed my parents had left with I said, "I think my parents left with that table." And she said, they have. She goes, "They did." She goes, "Actually, we were selling some props, and they bought that and left you here." And I said, left backstage at Les Mis, and there's trouble, you say, because I said, these curls carry the power of Carole King. And I said, "This is I said, I guess I'm on a dual mission." I said, "Do you believe in yourself?" And she said, "I do." And I said, "Well, in the moments when doubt creeps in, remember that you said you believe in yourself. I believe in you as a witness to your performance, a witness to your talent, a witness to your hard work, paying off on the stage. Your ability to take the term stealing the show and throw it in the garbage, because they should have never called it stealing the show, because the only person that would say you stole the show is a fool. You made the show better. You made the show wonderful." And she blushed. And she kissed me on the cheek, and she said, "I think it's time for you to get a tour of..." And I said, "Well, I said, I don't know." He said, what's the trouble backstage here at Les Mis?" And she said, "Are you familiar with the song Ohio by Neil Young?" And I said, "I am." He said, "Is it in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young too?" He said, "I like the Massey Hall version, and I know Carole King does, so I know we're on the right level here. What does this have to do with Les Mis and Cosette?" And she said, "Well, sometimes success doesn't bring the things we think it does." And I said, "Like certainty?" I said, "Because I can hear you on that one." And she said, "Well, some people are looking for different things than what you're searching for." And I said, "Well, before I said, before I head on to this Cosette-related mission, I said, I get a few questions." I said, "You're going to believe in yourself." And I said, "If you're the person, to craft the next, 20 years from now, you'll steal the show." I said, "We need you. The world needs music. So you believe." And she said, I'll move forward one step at a time, one night at a time here on Broadway, sometimes two. When we do," she goes, "if I do back to backs." And I said, "Well, okay." So I said, "Can you do a curl bump for me?" And she bumped my curls with her elbow. And she giggled, and she said, "I hope we cross paths again." And I said, "So I should just wander around the backstage changing rooms of Les Mis?" And she said, she goes, "Well, let's do." She goes, "Maybe you're right." She goes, "Because it's a bit labyrinthy back there." And I said, "Ohio." And she said, "Yeah, you have to figure out why you're here." I said, "Okay." Should have been. And I said, "Okay." He said, "Is Cassette, her ambitions are bigger than Broadway, aren't they?" And I said, somehow, I said, there's something going on here because I can't even remember anything about Les Mis other than Jean Valjean. And they do, the dude trying to go get him. And I said, was like Cassette in love with like the general or something like that, or he was in love with her? I never saw, one day in the future they'll make a movie about this that I haven't seen. And she said, you're nervous. And I said, okay. I said, I'm trying to say yes. These girls help. I said, I think the whole thing about this, not only is this permanent, permanent, and, imbued with the spirit of Carole King, and, some sort of whatever powers are at the hands of Frank Zizzo, the barber. But I can also use it for self-soothing. I think that's the benefit it has for me, because I can do curl bump. I said, see how I hold the top of my hand and I just rub it on my curls every once in a while. That's another self-soothe. Then I do curl pet, which I guess it's so effective I don't do it obsessively. So I just do a couple of curl pets at the top of my head. I pet my own curls. And then she said, are you self-soothed enough to meet Cassette? And I said, maybe we shouldn't meet. Maybe we should cross paths. She said, you're wise in your curls. And I said, well, I said, Carole King, we'll probably count that one towards Carole King or Frank or Pavone's Pizza. And as we headed backstage, I heard the sounds of Bob Marley, Is This Love, playing. And I didn't know if it was playing within my curls or across the room. But then I saw the presence that I'd seen on stage earlier, that had captured my attention. It stirred my gut and the stuff below my gut and my heart and my mind. It took me on an emotional journey. And now it was just, I said, oh boy, is this love that I'm feeling? But then I decided to pause and really listen to Carole King. Like these songs, they say she's playing the classics right now. Share the shelter of my single bed. And I blushed, and then I looked back, and the innkeeper's wife was gone. And I said, I never caught her name. And then the actress that played Cassette said, I'm sorry, what? I said, I never caught her name. She said, who? She said, are you the one? And then I stepped into the light and she gasped and she giggled. And then she said, you're a bit like a Curly Warhol. And I sat, I said, do you mind if I take, I said, I'm taking a seat here. I said, yeah, I'm not a billionaire, so I don't have an eccentric haircut, but it's idiosyncratic, my hair. I said, but I'm here, you wouldn't believe this, but I think I'm here to help you. And she said, how so? And I said, I'm not sure. And she said, who sent you? And I said, well, it gets confusing, to be honest. I think a barber, of all people, sent me to help. I said, he said, well, I'm just here. I said, I'm just here to help. I was, I watched the performance tonight and my mind was blown. And I don't want to make you uncomfortable, and I'm sure this happens to you a lot. And it's probably not even fair. But, I was transported through all these emotions, so I may be projecting it on you in, like some sort of, romantic projection. I don't know what they call it. And she said to me, they called it starstruck. And I said, well, that's the right word. And she said, do you want to get a drink? And I said, I said, I'll go, sure. And because this was a different life, I said, okay, I'll join you. And then we went down to the Playwright, which is a place I had been before. And we went into the Playwright, and there were calls to her. and there was some hoots, and I guess word had got a reverse Warhol call, to me, and I did curl, and because I was a different person, I was able to. I guess there's less, when you have a permanent perm, in the power that kind of brings, the curls diffuse any self-consciousness. So I was, even if people were laughing at me, I was curl bumping, and I said, "What is this? Was this the power of people like Andy Warhol, or but I was just having fun?" And she said, "Let's take a booth over here, Mr. Starstruck." And I said, "It must be hard for you dealing with these starstruck people all the time." And she said, "It has its charms." And she lit a cigarette just like you'd expect someone in this situation to light a cigarette would, except for one pause, one momentary lapse in confidence that let me know I was still on a mission, not get to broke the striking of the stars in my eyes. And let me know, to do a curl twirl, which is another form of like both refocusing and self-soothing. And I said, "Well, I'm here to help you. And I don't know if my star strikes are going to do that." And she said, "Are you familiar with the song, They Can't Take That Away From Me?" And I said, "The great Broadway song, they Can't Take That Away From Me." He said, I guess I am familiar with that much of it, that part." And she said, "Ever since I met you, it's been stuck in my head." And I said, "Is it the way I wear my hair or the way I sip my tea?" And I took a sip of the tea that I had ordered. I said, "I think you might be curl struck." And she said, "I might be." And she took a long pull of her cigarette with the fuzzy noise that goes with it. She looked away and let it out, because this was back in the day when you could still smoke inside, which was not that, overrated, to be sure. And I said, "Is there something within your..." I said, "Okay, so I've been sent to help you." And she said, "You've been sent to help me?" And I said, "Well, in a generalized sense, I specifically sent." I said, "Well, I think I'm here to help you. I don't know who else I would help." And it's always easier to help someone that you're projecting feelings onto, like I am with you. And then I paused like that, because then I said, "Wow, holy cow." And she said, "They forget I'm not cassette." And I said, "Well," I said, "I don't think it's that. I think it's the power of music and the power." I said, "Yeah, I don't know." And then my face must have changed, because she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I don't know. I'm getting some sort of interference." And she said, "What kind?" And I said, "Carol, the kind that Carole King sends through my curls." I said, "We need to get out of here." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, for some reason the Doobie Brothers song China Groove is stuck in my head. I don't even know what that means. But I find I work best in these Carole King related situations when we're moving." And she said, "Can I hold your hand?" And as we walked out of the playwright and we turned down to Broadway, she took hold of my hand, and she, took a hold of my heart, but in a way that was fair to neither one of us, because she was holding the hand of a man with curls, and I was holding the hand of someone that had transformed into cassette and carried me away. And she said, "You look hot." And I said, "It feels like might as well be walking on the sun," and that's also what Carole King kind of told me to say it. And I said, "Okay, is this like a Cyrano de Bergerac situation?" And I said, "Maybe it is," because she had laughed she said, "I feel like that too." And I said, "Are you trying to distract your..." I said, "Are you familiar with..." I think the movie was Roxanne, when it was Steve Martin vehicle. And I said, "Because I said, I think I'm supposed to help you. Is it like, you have some sort of, like, are you heartbroken? And she said, kind of, but not in the way you think, not romantically heartbroken. And I said, well, maybe I could be your non-romantic Cyrano de Bergerac. I said, I said, I'm more familiar with Roxanne and Steve Martin, but I could be your non-romantic. And I said, but I guess if and this is even weirder, because if I'm in love with Cassette, but you're really just an actress, you're not Cassette. And I said, it's a lot of layers. And she said, no wonder. And I said, well, tell me more. And she said, well, it's my sister, Guinevere. And I said, okay. She said, I'll give you the long and short of it. And I said, I never understood what that means. So why don't you just give me the short of it, and then I'll make it long by asking a ton of questions. And I knew this was right because Guinevere by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young was playing in my curls, at least on a molecular level. And she said, my sister Guinevere was the one who wanted to be on Broadway. And she goes, I did too, but she had dreamed about it before I was even born. And I said, she's your older sister, huh? She said, yeah. And she was the one who told me about, she taught me about musicals and the love of people like she said Carole King and Bette Midler. And she said Cats and she went on and on. And I said, what about Forever Plaid? Does your sister like Forever Plaid? And she just looked at me like she was trying to tell if I was joking or serious. And then I said, well, I've seen that face before. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's like the Beatles song. I've seen the face of someone confused by what I said. But I've also seen that face. I say, you feel like he said, this is a hard thing about these human relationships, huh? Like you feel like maybe your sister's jealous of you. I said, but do you really know? And she said, well, we don't get along. And I said, has she ever come to see you perform? And she said, once, and she didn't wait around. And I said, wow, that must be tough on both. She always dreamed about being on Broadway. And I said, what happened? And she said she couldn't, didn't make it onto Broadway, not even in the chorus, not even in the chorus line. And I said, well, what does she do now? And she says, and then Carole King was one step ahead. And she says, stay up late. And I said, oh boy, like stay up late, like the Talking Head song. And she said, no, well, she says she works, she said she works at it. And we had been walking for a while as we've been talking, still holding hands, still confusing for one or two parts of me. Because our hands weren't just clasped together. They were interlocked, finger against finger, thumb against the soft, fleshy part of the thumb. I think, at least that's what my memory said, that soft, most vulnerable part of my hand. Her thumb was holding it. Then I did a curl slide, which, was a little bit like I pulled my curl. Just like a little bit of snapping, snapping me out of it, like a little pull on the old hair. And she said she works at a diner right around here. And I said, a New York City diner. And she said, well, she owns it too. But she works, no one wants to work this shift, the night shift. And I said, it's one of those diners. I said, oh yeah, this is when I'm normally at it. I said, maybe anytime between. He said, usually I like to hit it like about 4:45 if I'm at a New York City diner, depending on how, But I said, that was my other life in another universe without these curls. And he said, let's go to this diner and let's get to the bottom of the situation right now. This is why I must be here. They said, unless, these breathless feelings I'm feeling are real. But I said, you must have to put up with it. And she said, yeah, I do have to put up with it a lot. And I said, we could get to know each other after all this. And she said, to be honest, I'm not. She goes, you're actually too eccentric for me. And then there's a whole quick deflation. And I noticed we were on, as we turned on Amsterdam. Of course, I thought of the Elvis Costello song, New Amsterdam. And so then I said, okay, Carole King wants me to have a new start, don't get down. But we were still holding hands, so I was still confused at the same time. And she said, yeah, you wouldn't want to get to know me anyway. I'm the kind of sister that lets her sister down. And then the red neon signs of diner lit her face up because we were close. The silver paneling shone across the street. And they said, let's go in there and, let's see how your sister's doing. She said, well, one more thing you should know about my sister's diner. She goes, every night is Christmas Eve in my sister's diner. She goes, I said, a themed diner. And she goes, well, that was when I got the role, Christmas Eve. And I said, oh, so I said, then she bought the diner. And she goes, yeah. She goes, it was years later. And I never put it together because I used to come and, come to the diner. But she goes, because she plays like the mistletoe disco band. And I said to Carole King, I said, the mistletoe disco band, and she said, yeah, and she plays the music by them. And I said, well, I love that. I said that those are some of my favorite Christmas carols by the mistletoe disco band. And then I could hear Odd Long Sign or whatever playing. And she said, oh, it's Countdown to Christmas in there. And I said, so Christmas Eve, you got cast, or you got the role of Colette Cassette, the role in Les Mis that, I said, but that role doesn't come with a roadmap to stardom. It just comes with the burden of dealing with starstruck buffoons. No one gave you all the answers. No one gave you that role. I'm sure you worked hard, and, I'm hoping that you're getting your talent nurtured there. And she said, sometimes. And she said, some people will eat you for breakfast. And I said, well, it's time for breakfast, a breakfast meal at a diner. And I said, don't worry. I said, I can, these girls allow me to slip into many different roles anyway. So I said, let's go in. And the sweet disco sounds of the mistletoe disco band were playing. And I said, trail behind me. And I said, did somebody say it's Christmas Eve in here? Because it sounds like it's New Year's Eve. And then a woman, she didn't just step out from behind the counter. She slid down the counter on her elbow. And she said, it's a countdown to Christmas Eve. She said, it's Christmas Eve countdown. She goes, because it's almost midnight. So she goes, it would be Christmas Day, but we just reset to Christmas Eve again. And I said, sounds delicious. I said, a couple of cups of Joe. And I said, have you ever thought about getting a Christmas disco ball in here? And she said, no. And I said, well, you could if you put it close enough to the Christmas lights, and then she looked over my shoulder. And she saw her sister, and she went silent, but her lips didn't go down into a frown. They just went into a straight, flat line. And I said, thank goodness. I said, I'm so happy to be here. I said, your sister's been telling me all about this place. And she said, really? And I said, yeah, she knew, your sister knows how much I love Christmas and the mistletoe. I said, what, did you just play the whole mistletoe? And then the track came to an end. It was midnight. It was past midnight. And she said, yeah, but she goes, now I'm going to put on. And I said, the James Brown Christmas album. She said, maybe. And I said, well, Merry Christmas to you. I said, do you have any gingerbread pancakes? And she said, I do. And I said, I'll take a quarter order of those because I can't really I said, a full order of gingerbread pancakes is lunacy. And I said, have you ever thought about putting eggnog in the coffee? And she said, sure, one eggnog coffee. And then she went back behind. And I said, what about you? And I realized we were still holding hands. And her sister walked off, and she said, the actress that played Colette, Cassette said, the song remain, and I said, the song remains the same. Because she said, then some Christmas song started. I don't know, because I had to get back to Carole King and the task at hand. And I said, this is one beautiful diner. I said, I'm starstruck in here. And she was working on my gingerbread pancakes, and her sister reluctantly sat down. She pulled an ashtray over, and she let go of my hand, because it'd be hard to pull an ashtray and light a cigarette. And she lit a cigarette, and she had to look around the diner. And she said, you have Mom's decorations up on the tree. And her sister was, flipping my one like one pancake, actually a quarter. It was an order of 4, so it was like 1 1/3. And she was also making something else, and I couldn't catch what it was. But she said, yeah, those are Mom's decorations. And Colette's Cassette sighed. And the sister, Guinevere, she said, well, what brings you around here? And she said, well, like you said, he's obsessed with Christmas too. And she said, I'm not obsessed with Christmas. I'm obsessed with making this diner a fun place to be. And she said, well, it's not fun right now with you. And then they had a silent stare down. And I said, well, wouldn't it be nice, just like the beach? I said, the Beach Boys had a Christmas album. I know it wasn't very nice. I don't know. I don't want to say, but wouldn't it be nice if just this Christmas Eve, you two, let's shut the diner down. And because I said, there's no customers in it. And I went and locked the door. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if you two just, and she said, well, I make your pancakes you're going to burn. And also I made her some French candy cane, French candy cane, French toast. And so and I said, we'll serve it up. I said, well, wouldn't it be nice if we get along this Christmas? And then I said, so this is your Mom's decorations on this tree. Holds special memories for the two of you, I could tell. And I said, why don't you give me a minute? I've got an idea. And I said, you two could talk or just, cook silently and you smoke silently. And it took all the ornaments off the tree. And there was little Christmas boxes that, it was giant pain. It took, I tried to, get the ornaments into wrapped Christmas stuff. And I said, well, that's not going to work. So then I said, oh, there's all those, what are those things called, stockings. So I was hiding the decorations around the restaurant and even shoving them, in the, the booth chairs, down the chairs. And I said, I got to use the restroom because I had a sense. I said, can you use my pen? And she said, yeah. And I noticed she had served it at a booth with my eggnog and the candy cane things. And she'd cooked herself something, also candy cane French toast. And I said, I'll be right back. And, my gut told me that somewhere nearby the bathroom was going to be a Santa outfit. So, of course, I found that in the storeroom closet and I put it on. And then as I put it on, Carole King said, Wilco, side with the seeds. And I said, Carole King, you're throwing me off here. And I said, side with the seeds. What does that mean? And I said, okay, don't overdo it. I took it as that. I said, okay, just throw the seeds and they'll grow. And so I said, okay, this is even easier. And I went out and they were kind of sitting at the same booth across from each other. And I came out, I said, oh, But one gimmick I decided to use was that I didn't put on the wig. I put on the beard, but not the wig. So when they saw me, they both looked at each other and burst into laughter. Because my curls, dirty blonde, brown curls were sticking out. So I looked, went from looking strange to ridiculous. And I said, whoa. I said, well, this is a special Christmas. These two, I have been, Santa has a special surprise because I know you two have worked so hard, so many different things, and you've had a couple of hard years here. And I've heard from both of you. I've been watching you both close. And I know that both your hearts are so full of love. But Santa doesn't always tell kids this, but it's complicated being an adult person out here. Complicated being a kid, not as simple as naughty or nice, is it? But I said, your friend Santa here is to fill this restaurant, planted around the restaurant, we'll say, all the decorations for your mother's tree. And I'm going to be back at midnight to make sure that the tree has been redecorated by both of you. And I know that, life's, Santa knows, okay? And Santa's going to give you both a hug here. And I want you both to choose what comfort message you want. You'd say, oh, Santa never told you. But I'm sure you know ways to soothe yourself with your hair. And because Santa's hair is so curly, he uses a lot of different methods. So choose. And the actress that played Cassette, she chose to flick it with her, like a little flick of, and again, my heart skipped, but it wasn't her, And then she kissed me on the cheek. And I said, well, I'm never going to get over that. Like, I'm going to be heartbroken. And I said, Santa's heart is breaking. Oh. And then Guinevere, she chose actually the old, she wound a curl up in her finger and then tugged it and then sprung it. And I said, well, tomorrow's Christmas, so get that tree ready for Santa. And, take a time to remember. And, you'll do great, you two. And, I said, Guinevere, maybe you and Santa could, go to a show sometime. But you don't have to decide tonight. And they both looked at me and they said, who are you? And, Carole King she did two who songs in one night. And I said, who am I is right. They said, if Santa doesn't return, every time you think of the turn of a curl, think of it wrapping around your hearts and comforting you. And then think, well, geez, what can I do to say, hey, I need a little comfort. I'm dealing with starstruck dudes all the time. And, I've got a diner and I also have some dash dreams. We all do. And then just give a little, your version of a curl bump, okay? Now get around and look around that restaurant and get that tree decorated and you'll find your ways. All right. And I set off into New York night. The diner at my back, my heart left behind, but a projected version. So I guess like the like whatever they call that, infatuation-esque, so not real. And I trotted off into the night, just me and my perm. All right, good night. I want to say thanks and good night to all the people that support the show. Rhonda B. Thanks and good night, Madison R. Thanks and good night, Jack M. Thanks and good night, Taylor Ann. Thank you. Misty M. Thank you and good night, Jody W. Thanks and good night. Thanks and good night to Michelle S. Thanks and good night to Rhonda C. Thank you and good night to Karen P. Thank you and good night to Karen N. Two separate Karens. Thank you both. Thanks and good night to Joey C. Thank you and good night to Mike W. Thank you and good night to Amber J. Thank you and good night to Jonas E. Thank you and good night to Jillian S. Thank you and good night to Rachel K. Thank you and good night to Lindsay N. Thank you and good night to Cindy L. Thanks and good night to Catherine M. Thank you and good night to Jennifer R. Thank you and good night to Brenda W. Thank you and good night to Good Run. Good Run. Thanks and good night to Ephraim. Thanks and good night to Antoinette. Thanks and good night to Kathy K. Thank you and good night to Laura B. Thank you and good night to Carl B. Thank you and good night to Mark M. Good night and thank you to Doran J. Thank you and good night to Judith R. Dana C. Thanks and good night. Thank you and good night to Shelly V. Thank you and good night to Melly M. Dylan, thank you and good night. Lisa G, good night and thank you. Dawn H, thank you and good night. Lena, thank you and good night. Pamela J to the K, thank you and good night. Gerald M, thank you and good night. Good night and thank you to Robin V. Good night, thank you. Good night, Eduardo P. Saying thanks and good night to Nate to the O to the N. Thank you and good night to Jennifer S. Natasha, thank you and good night. And Terry F., thank you and good night. Over on PayPal, I want to say thanks and good night to Pat W. Thank you and good night to Derek W. Thank you and good night to Jared S. Wendy F., thank you and good night. Deborah B., thank you and good night. Good night and thank you to Jennifer R. Gregory H., thank you and good night. Miranda R., good night and thank you. Anna L., thanks and good night. Catherine U., thank you and good night. Jermaine W., thank you and good night. Rebecca M., good night and thank you. Tessa B., good thanks and good night. Jamie L., good night and thank you. And Sharon D., thanks and good night. And then, of course, the king of Venmo, Bill K., got to thank Bill K., thank you and good night. And Tom D to the A, thank you and good night. And Nora C, thank you and good night. Thanks and good night, everybody. I'll talk to you later.